Hi there and welcome to me, Audrina Lane again, and the next chapter in Where Did Your Heart Go? By me. And we're here on chapter 37, but I'm going to break this down into two parts. So you get part 1 and then you get part 2, which will also include chapter 38 because it's kind of a short one and 37 is kind of a long one. So we'll get started now and then we'll just have a brief pause while I record another segment. So here we are. When Charlotte stepped into her room, she looked over at the new additions to her wardrobe. The helmet shone in the moonlight as she crossed to draw the curtains, pausing for a second to take in the stars that speckled the sky. She jumped into bed and detected the faint scent of Mitchell's aftershave on her pillow. She decided to read until he dropped her a text saying he was home. Reaching for the diary, she knew it was important to finish it before the dance competition in a fortnight. She had wanted to say something to her mum earlier, just ask her what had happened. But it was easier to read the words before that conversation. Charlie flicked through 6 weeks' worth of entries to get to the next time her mum saw James. Was this when it all came to an end? Dear Diary, Friday the 11th of November, 1988. College really dragged, but I was soon home and in the shower. I ran the shaver over my legs and underarms as usual, pausing for a moment as water trickled over my body, its caress waking up my dormant desires. As I absently moved the shower head over, I closed my eyes and remembered all the times James and I had been together, in some form of water. All of them were happy memories. I turned the water off and walked to my room in a towel, almost dropping it in shock when I found James already sitting on my bed. I rubbed my eyes just to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but he was very real as he stood up and closed the distance between us. "Aren't you a beautiful sight for sore eyes?" he murmured, his hands in my wet hair. "How did you get in without me hearing?" I asked, laying my head on his chest so I could hear his heart beating. "Your mum let me in and said you were in your room, and to go on up," he said, grinning. "But much better to find you in just a towel." His hand running along the top of it, he pulled it off in one swift tug. He stood back and allowed his gaze to run down my body, like the water had just moments earlier, some of the droplets still hanging there. I felt his hands gently slide over my shoulders and down to my breasts. I held my breath as he leaned in and took each into his mouth. The hotness of his tongue met the coolness of my skin in an explosion of sensations. I felt my legs start to quiver, and James did too, because he steered me over towards the bed and pushed me down onto the covers. "This is definitely my favourite way to start the weekend," he murmured, his lips nuzzling my earlobes and a whole set of nerve endings starting to tingle even more than before. "I agree," I said, breathless, as I lay pinned to the bed under his weight, extremely aware of his cock nudging my thigh. "Do you like a drink?" my mum shouted up the stairs from the landing below. We both froze as I managed to get enough breath to respond. "We'll be down in a minute, Mum. Coffee, please." As we listened in silence to her footsteps on the stairs, I looked up at James. "We'll have to finish this later." "Oh, yes, and there'll be no distractions or interruptions at my place, as my parents are away," he said. And after one long kiss he pulled away from me and I stood up. As James lounged on the bed, he watched me pull on some jeans and a jumper and pack the last few items for the weekend. "Do I need to bring anything special?" I asked. "No, just you," he replied. "Now we better get our arses downstairs before your mother gets suspicious about why our minute takes 10. James picked up my bag and I grabbed my coat, following him down to the kitchen. "I was just about to send a search party up for you two," my mum said, passing us our coffee. "Oh, I just had to finish packing," I replied, glancing over at James, who was looking amused as he bit into a biscuit. I blushed just thinking about what we had been doing upstairs, and I couldn't wait until we got going. "How's the job?" Mum asked, sitting down with her cup. "Oh, great, loving every moment of it," James replied. "It's hard work, but on the whole it's fantastic." The drive was good and we were soon at my favourite place in the world. James raced round the car and as always opened the door for me, another of the little things I loved about him. Once inside the house he turned to me and said, "So, what shall we do tonight?" Did you have anything in mind? I have plenty of things I want to do, he said, grinning at me with a wicked glint in his eyes. But first off, I think we need to finish what we started in your bedroom. He picked me up and carried me up to his. Placing me on the bed and started to slowly remove all my clothes, he paused to admire the new baby pink underwear I had picked up the previous week. His hands slid over the silken lace before they lay on the floor. Lying naked in front of him, I watched as he removed his jeans and jumper, and I spied the silk boxer shorts from his birthday. Even after all the time we'd spent together, I still felt shocked that someone so gorgeous was actually in love with me. Before we could continue, James flicked the switch on the radio, and the sound of waiting for a star to fall swirled around the room. James's lips captured mine, and our tongues started to explore, as I let the lyrics into my mind, shocked at how apt they were. The music faded as the beating of my heart increased with every touch on my skin. James indulged both him and me with the sensations his caresses brought to us both. As he entered me, I pulled him close. "I love you more than you'll ever know or understand," I whispered, as I closed my eyes and let the gentle ripples turn to breathtaking waves crashing on rocks. I was shaking when he finally withdrew and curled up beside me. He turned and said, "Till the end of time." His eyes closed as he sat beside me, whilst I gazed at him in awe. I heard the phone ring, and as James remained asleep, I crept out from under his arms and padded downstairs to answer it. When I did, I just heard silence and the faint sound of someone breathing before the line went dead. Shaking my head, I stepped into the kitchen and searched in the fridge for some cold drinks. I found a half-open bottle of white wine, so I pulled that into a glass before I grabbed a bottle of beer for James and returned back upstairs. He opened his eyes just as I walked through the door. "What a fucking hot sight you are, you should always be naked." He sat up and I handed him the beer. The phone rang, but when I answered it there was just breathing on the other end, and then whoever it was rang off. "That's strange," James replied, but as I watched him he took a long gulp of beer and seemed nervous. "Shall we order takeaway for tea?" he asked. "Yeah, that'll be lovely. I'm starving." We enjoyed an evening of food and television, only interrupted by the phone ringing again. The first call was his parents letting James know they'd arrived safely in Scotland and giving him the number for the hotel, should he need it. The second call was just as we were heading upstairs to bed, so I continued on as James answered it. I lay in bed wondering who it was and why the conversation seemed to be taking a long time. I was almost on the verge of going back down when I heard footsteps on the stairs, followed by the usual sounds from the bathroom. When James entered the room, he looked slightly different, his usual smile replaced by a more sombre look. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just some stuff from work, nothing to worry about," he replied, seeming to quickly switch on a forced smile. I opened my arms to him as he undressed and we embraced. Our lips came together and I took the lead, trailing kisses over his face and neck and chest, heading down his body. However, his usual response to my touch never happened, and he remained soft in my hands and mouth, before he pulled me up and nuzzled his face into my neck. "I think I'm just tired," he murmured, pulling me close. "Sorry, sweetheart." I smiled softly in the darkness and we settled down to sleep. It eluded me as I lay there worrying about the phone call and his lack of response to my touch. But I knew there was something wrong, and I didn't know how to ask him about it. Saturday the 12th of November, 1988. When we awoke, I looked through the crack in the curtains to find snow falling on the ground. Snow always excited me and appealed to my inner child, so I moved to the bottom of the bed and pulled the curtains wide, revealing a white wonderland below. All of a sudden I felt hands grab me around the waist as James pulled me into his arms, all trace of last night's failure erased. "You're awake this morning," I said, as I twisted round so that I could kiss him. "Definitely, awake and raring to go." "Best be quick then, as it's snowing outside and I want to go and play in it," I replied, turning in his embrace as I was on top of him. Playfully I eased myself down on to him and James ran his hands up my body. As we moved together, I stared into his eyes and tried to see the shadow that had been there the night before. It had disappeared, and I abandoned my body to the feelings of love and desire that coursed through my hot skin. I decided I had been worrying about nothing as he flooded into me, his orgasm mingling with the sweet wetness of mine. Lying in each other's arms, I felt so secure in my feelings for James, so sure he truly was the love of my life. "Come on, the snow might melt," I said, pulling off the covers. "You're just like a little kid," James said, laughing at as my enthusiasm infected him. "But I think we should have breakfast first." "Okay," I relented as I pulled my jeans and t-shirt on, followed by my thick jumper. After toast and coffee, we pulled on our coats and gloves and entered the garden. I spun around, looking up to the sky, flakes continuing to fall, and kissed my face with their coldness, hanging in my hair. I didn't notice that James had bent down and shaped a snowball until it flew and hit me on my back. "Snowball fight," he shouted, scooping up more snow. I dodged behind one of the apple trees so that I had a chance to start an arsenal to attack. We played a stealthy game of cat and mouse between the trees, each getting some good shots in and receiving some in return. And I decided to make a run for it back towards the house as more snowballs pelted my behind. I eventually collapsed in the snow, laughter shaking my body and making my sides ache. "I surrender," I called out, as I could see James advancing towards me, 2 final snowballs, 1 in each hand. "Are you sure?" he said. I looked up into his face, excitement glittering in his eyes. "Yes, please put down those balls. I'm defenceless," I replied, surreptitiously scooping up some snow in the hand furthest away from him. "Okay," James replied as he dropped his to the ground and then bent down to pull me up. It was then that I struck and landed mine straight in his face. "That's so naughty," he spluttered through the mouthful of snow. "Sorry, I'll make it up to you," I murmured as he stopped trying to pull me up and sank down on top of me, a blanket of snow beneath us. "You are a cheeky minx," he murmured, his lips reaching down to capture mine. "I think we should call it a draw," I replied, suddenly not feeling so cold, even though the snow surrounded me and started to soak into my jeans. I couldn't deny the feel of his hot kisses on my cold face and neck. His fingers slid down and opened the zip on my coat, so that he could run his hands down my jumper and then up and under it. I jumped when his icy touch seemed to burn into my skin. My hands found their way round his back and then under his coat and jumper. James shuddered as my fingers touched the skin of his back. And we will have to wait and see what happens next from the next bit of video. Join me again shortly.